One of the bigger false perceptions surrounding Cormac McCarthy was that he was this impoverished writer, and that is true. From 1960 to 1974, he had little to no money. He did have to bathe in the lake. Him and his wife didn't have toothpaste or food and all these different things. And 14 years is a long time, and most of us out there would not be able to stick that out, to be able to tell your wife time and time again, I'm sorry, we have no money. I'm not going to get a job at the gas station so that we can have a little bit more money. I'm going to be a famous writer one day. But one of the under-discussed aspects of Cormac McCarthy's life was that he was born as a rich kid. And today we are going to hear from McCarthy himself about his wealthy upbringing. And I want this discussion to help ground us as writers in our own journey. Because when you hear about the impoverished Cormac McCarthy era, that gives me motivation personally. I'm like, damn, I can do this. I can quit my job. I'm going to make it big one day. Like, it doesn't matter how hard it is. Yeah, let's do this. But first, you need to ask yourself, how good of a writer are you? Is it really a good idea to take that risk? Because most writers out there think they are way better than what they are, myself included. And even worse than that, they imagine their potential being larger than it actually is, especially with the amount of work that they're willing to put in and their previous choices. And what do I mean by previous choices? Well, let us first hear from McCarthy, and then we'll get back to that. And this is from an interview. Quote, he speaks reverently, we're talking about McCarthy here, of his paternal grandfather, John Francis, for whom he named his youngest son. In contemporary terms, his grandfather was a startup entrepreneur, a handy machinist, who, like McCarthy, was very interested in how things work. He was also an early feminist who bucked the trends by putting all his daughters, as well as his sons, through college. One of McCarthy's aunts became a biologist, another a classical language professor. His dad, Charles, was a successful lawyer who graduated at the top of his class at Yale. Okay, so hopefully that shattered some of your perceptions of Cormac McCarthy. Did you read that last line? His dad graduated at the top of his class at Yale. And McCarthy's dad in 1941 was recruited by the Tennessee Valley Authority at the start of World War I because there was a high demand for power for the essential industries, to fuel the war machine. And so during a couple-year period, the TVA established 11 hydroelectrical dams in one of the largest hydropower programs ever undertaken by the United States. But when you start building dams, what happens? Well, you start to ruin land. You start to displace people. And so McCarthy's dad, his job was the head lawyer for eminent domain. So he would be the one who'd go in there and boot these people off the land or tell them, hey, we're building this dam. There's nothing you can do. So the McCarthys in their local area were very rich and powerful. They lived about 20 minutes south of Knoxville. And to this day, if you are a big time attorney, you're going to be wealthier than 99% of people in that area. And so now bringing this back to you and I, was one of your parents a classical language professor or your aunt? Were one of your parents or are one of your parents a lawyer or someone who deals with language at a high level? Most likely not. Some of you guys out there are lucky enough to have that. But when you look at the two people we've covered most on this channel, Cormac McCarthy and David Foster Wallace, their parents and their family were very literary. You wonder, how does Cormac McCarthy know all these words in the Oxford English Dictionary? Well, because he started reading it, as we'll talk about in another video from that unreleased interview I'm going to be making videos on for the months to come. He started getting into that stuff at like 8 or 9 years old. And even better than that, he seemingly has the genetics and the push from his family to succeed in that, because my dad was a professor of statistics. And so I have this huge advantage in seeing the world mathematically and understanding economics and these types of things, because I was just inundated with all that information and, training or upbringing from him in that regard. But that has done nothing for me in a literary sense. It's probably been a negative because, too much mathematics and statistics in your head usually stifle creativity. And even better, McCarthy got the best of both worlds because he speaks fondly of John Francis, his grandfather, who was an entrepreneur, who was a handy man. And McCarthy was the same way. He liked fixing up old trucks. He made desks and furniture for the Santa Fe Institute. But he was balancing both worlds. He was this man who had read very deeply, but he also had that logical or more tinkering side of his mind too. And Once again, most people don't have both of these sides. The average American man, age 30 in this country right now, is not, this handyman, machinist, or a guy who understands those types of things at a deep level, or a literary or intellectual person. And when you look at a lot of these classic authors like Hemingway and others, it's a pretty good combination to have because you're balancing fire and ice. And when we look at McCarthy's sisters, he had a brother who also became a successful lawyer, and he had sisters who went and got degrees at prestigious universities in the Northeast. And so McCarthy had a lot of pressure around him and a lot of people pulling him up. He talks about speaking with his brother who is really into biology, and they talk about the end of the world and all these different things. Do you talk about that with your siblings? Maybe you do, but was your sibling trained and is functioning at the super high level? And so these things start to leak through. And so we have to keep a grounded perspective on how Cormac McCarthy got so good and our future, because he didn't have technology. He sacrificed 14 years of his life in poverty, but he also got to understand some of the bigger aspects of reality. He also married rich. His first wife was not rich, but his second wife, Annie Delisle, came from a wealthy family in England, and they traveled around Spain and did all this stuff together. And eventually, McCarthy became a millionaire in today's money when he received the MacArthur Fellowship in 1981, which enabled him to travel and research and and kind of live his life even further in the 1980s and the 1990s. And then, one could say the pinnacle of being a single rich guy was when Cormac McCarthy was in his 50s, if not his 60s, early 60s, he married a woman in her 20s. And this may all seem very esoteric to you guys, but these things matter. What are you coming to the table with? What kind of confidence? What type of drive and training and baggage do you have right now? Because I will tell you, it's much easier, even today, if you are rich, to succeed in the publishing world. I know someone who was from a wealthy family, and he wrote a novel, right? I remember seeing an early draft of it. It was not good. You could write something better, but because he has money from his parents and stuff, he paid tens of thousands of dollars to get this thing edited. Now it's being released by a major publisher, I think in August. He also has the money to hire an agency to start marketing for him, because that's also a big part of all this. If you want to be successful and have a name as an author, you need to have a marketing push and a persona and, need people to know you. But poor people, middle-class people, they don't understand these types of moves. They don't understand, investing in yourself and saving money for editors and getting an agency, getting an advertising agency or marketing agency to build your brand and these types of things. That's bizarre to all of us, including myself. Like, why would you do that? But I know a lot of you guys, I know my audience, you guys are taking writing more seriously, usually anywhere from your mid-20s to your mid-30s. That's kind of the age range. And you guys are like, okay, I can do this. But how far are you behind? So I believe in quantum leaps. I know that we can stand on the shoulders of guys like Cormac and others and do better than them. But the worst thing that you can do on that journey is have a false sense of hubris of where you are starting and where you are going to be. I would encourage you to deeply understand McCarthy's first novel, The Orchard Keeper, which is a very complex novel that most people think is like sucks, but McCarthy made it very hard on purpose because he was that talented. In his mid to late 20s, he wrote a masterpiece of a novel, in my opinion, that's still too hard for people today, a postmodernist classic. And I do have a 10-hour course explaining it, and we are currently running an Orchard Keeper book club in the Right Conscious Substack if you want to join us. But look at that novel and ask yourself, can you write that good right now? How long will it take you to be able to write paragraphs and pages with that prose and the feeling that he evokes there? And when you have that figured out, that's where you gauge yourself. That's where you try to get to. Don't worry about getting to Blood Meridian because that's so far down the line. And one last thing to note, when I read all the drafts available of Blood Meridian in the archive, I noticed in 1981, when he got that $1 million, his writing did improve. There was an energy put back into the work because I think he was able to travel, research, and do more things and feel a little bit more comfortable about writing that novel. And so this is weird for me because I don't know what to tell you guys. But what I would say and what I'm starting to recommend is that you need to preserve your longer works. Like, don't release shit. And don't release something good if you don't have an audience yet. I have friends and know people and get books sent by you guys all the time. And there's a book and it's decent, if not good, if not great. And there's no audience. It's just dying on Kindle with 2 reviews, if any. And so you don't need money or these things to write a good novel. It may take you longer. It may take you longer to get to this level or do these things. But in the interim, you need to start thinking, okay, What kind of game plan do I have so that when I release this, I don't have to hopefully rely on publishers to publish this, or I'm fucked? Because that's a sad place we're at right now. A bunch of writers who care, who want to be great, but just have no upward mobility with their career as a writer. So I don't have the answers, at least in this video, about how to change that, but not all hope is lost. You can still do things. You can still work on your book for a while and get things going, and then have a successful launch and have people want to read your book. I love you guys. Thank you for being here. The videos are dropping like fire, and I will see you guys in the next video, which will be also dropping today.